My husband sent me on a cruise so I could relax. But before departure, I happened to come home at the wrong time and overheard that it was a one-way ticket. I thought, if that's how it is, dear, have it your way. But you'll regret it 3 times over. Welcome. They say you don't choose your family. But what do you do when a choice still has to be made? Today we'll talk about one such difficult situation. A July morning smothered the city apartment in a stifling blanket of heat, as if foretelling that this day would become a turning point in Catalina's fate. Sunbeams filtered through the heavy bedroom curtains, where she had been lying with her eyes open for half an hour, listening to her husband Gonzalo bustling about in the next room. 20 years of marriage had taught her to recognize every sound of his morning rituals, the creak of the floorboards under his feet, the hiss of the coffee maker, the rustle of the newspaper. But today, in those familiar sounds, there was something different. Some elusive solemnity, as if he were preparing for an important event. Catalina got out of bed, ran a hand through her graying hair, which she stubbornly dyed back to her natural chestnut every month, and headed to the kitchen. Gonzalo sat at the table, the morning paper spread before him, and his face shone with a satisfaction she hadn't seen in a long time. In his hands, he held 2 narrow strips of cardboard, and when Catalina walked in, he looked up at her with a smile that seemed too wide, too artificial. "My dear," Gonzalo said, setting aside the paper and standing to meet his wife, "I have a surprise for you. I've long noticed how tired you are, how much you need a break from all these household cares." Catalina stopped by the refrigerator, automatically gripping the handle. Something in her husband's tone put her on alert, though outwardly she kept her face calm. Over the years, she had learned to read between the lines, to catch hidden meanings in the most innocent phrases. "What kind of surprise?" she asked evenly, taking milk from the fridge. Gonzalo handed her the tickets, his eyes gleaming as if he were giving her a diamond necklace. "A cruise in the Mediterranean, 14 days. Imagine it, Catalina. You'll rest, sunbathe, enjoy the sea air. The ship sails the day after tomorrow. I've arranged everything." Catalina took the tickets with trembling fingers. On the glossy surface was an image of a luxurious liner, and below were her name and the departure date. Something inside her tightened into a knot of anxiety, though formally it all looked like the care of a loving husband. "That's very generous of you," she said slowly, studying the tickets. "And what about you? You could use a rest too." Gonzalo waved a hand with feigned nonchalance. "You know how things are right now. The new project with Roberto needs constant attention. But I'm so happy you'll finally be able to rest for real. I can't even imagine how bored you must have been all these years within 4 walls." Catalina nodded, lowering her gaze. "Bored?" Yes, in recent years, her life really had resembled Groundhog Day. Cleaning, cooking, rare meetups with friends that grew rarer still, as her world shrank to the size of their 3-room apartment. Once, she had worked as a translator, spoke 4 languages fluently, and dreamed of a career in an international company. But 20 years ago, Gonzalo convinced her that family mattered more than career, that her place was by his side, that he would provide for them both. "Thank you," she said at last. "This is truly unexpected." "Wonderful, then." Gonzalo put an arm around her shoulders, and his touch felt cold despite the heat. "It's settled. Today you'll handle preparations, tomorrow you'll pack the last things, and the day after tomorrow, your new life begins. new life. The words echoed in her head as Gonzalo, having finished his coffee, went to his study. Catalina stayed in the kitchen, holding the tickets and trying to understand why instead of joy. An ever-growing unease was taking hold of her. Maybe it was that in all their years together, Gonzalo had never once shown such spontaneous generosity, or the way he so quickly and neatly declined to go with her, as if everything had been planned in advance. She set the tickets on the counter and started making breakfast. But her thoughts wandered far from eggs and toast. Memories surfaced of the past months of their life together. How Gonzalo had begun working late, how his gaze had changed when he looked at her, how his business trips had become more frequent. She had chalked it up to a midlife crisis, to the fatigue of routine. Now those memories formed a troubling mosaic. After breakfast, Gonzalo announced that he had important business at the office, and Catalina was left alone. She walked through the apartment, which suddenly seemed foreign. The expensive furniture Gonzalo had chosen, the paintings he had bought. Even her own things seemed to have lost their individuality in this meticulously curated interior. Everything here reflected his taste, his idea of what a successful businessman's apartment should look like. Catalina decided to go out to clear her head and think things over. She needed to stop by the bank, pick up some forms for the cruise, and buy a few things for the trip. She took her handbag, checked her documents, and headed for the door. But on the landing, she remembered she had forgotten her passport, which lay in her jewelry box in the bedroom. When she came back in, she heard Gonzalo's voice coming from the study. He was on the phone, and the tone of his conversation made her freeze in the doorway. In his voice were notes she hadn't heard in a very long time. Excitement, anticipation, an almost boyish thrill at an upcoming adventure. "Roberto, everything is going according to plan," Gonzalo was saying, and Catalina leaned against the wall, feeling her heart beat faster. "Yes," she agreed. She suspects nothing. Honestly, I thought it would be harder to convince her, but she bit like a fish on a hook. Catalina covered her mouth with her hand to stifle a gasp. Each word from her husband struck her like a slap, but she forced herself to keep listening. "The ship leaves the day after tomorrow at noon. In 2 weeks, the problem will be solved for good. I've already contacted the right people on board. The captain is in the loop. You know how it's done on the open sea. A tragic accident, no witnesses, a fruitless search. The insurance paid out with no questions asked." The world around Catalina spun. She braced herself against the wall to keep from falling and closed her eyes, trying to process what she'd heard. Her own husband, the man she had lived with for 20 years, was discussing her death like a business operation. There was not a trace of regret in his voice, only cold calculation. "Yes, I know there's a risk," Gonzalo went on, "but the alternative is worse. A divorce would cost me half my fortune, and she knows too much about our affairs. Better to settle it decisively. Besides, I have plans for the future. Patricia has already agreed to be my wife as soon as I'm free." Patricia. The name cut Catalina like a knife. The young secretary from Gonzalo's office, whom she had seen a few times at corporate events. A flashy blonde with big eyes and a smile that seemed too wide for her face. So infidelity was part of the plan, too. "Don't worry, Roberto." Gonzalo's voice grew more confident. "In a month, we'll be free of all obligations and can calmly develop the business. And as for conscience, you know, in our line of work, sentimentality is an unaffordable luxury." Quietly, Catalina made her way to the exit, careful not to set the floorboards creaking. She had to get out before Gonzalo ended the call. In the hallway, she grabbed her handbag and the documents from the shelf and slipped out the door. Only once outside did she allow herself a deep breath. Her legs carried her of their own accord, and she found herself in a small square near the house. There, on a bench under old trees, where children played and pensioners strolled unhurriedly, the reality of what was happening began to truly sink in. Gonzalo was planning to kill her. Her, his wife, the mother of his children, the woman who had given him the best years of her life. And he was doing it not in a fit of passion, not on impulse, but coldly, methodically, like a business plan. Tears welled in her eyes, but Catalina forced herself to focus. This was no time for self-pity. Gonzalo had underestimated her, thinking she would meekly go to the slaughter. Perhaps once that would have been true. The old Catalina, the obedient wife who had dissolved into someone else's ambition, might indeed have missed the trap. But something changed in her at that moment. Something awakened from a long sleep. She remembered herself 20 years earlier. Ambitious, intelligent, full of plans, a young woman who could talk for hours at international negotiations, read complex contracts, and find exits from the most tangled situations. That Catalina hadn't vanished. She had only been sleeping under layers of domestic routine and family duties. And now it was time to wake her up. Catalina wiped her eyes and took her phone out of her handbag. It was time to call old friends and restore the connections she'd lost over years of marriage. Marcella, her former colleague, now worked at a major law firm. Esteban, with whom she once translated contracts, had become a private detective. Roberto, the very partner of Gonzalo with whom her husband had just discussed her death. She wondered how strong their friendship was if big money were on the line. Rising from the bench, Catalina felt a cold fire of resolve ignite in her chest. If Gonzalo wanted to play dangerous games, he would get a worthy opponent. For 20 years she had followed his lead, letting him make the decisions, draw the plans, dispose of their shared future. Now it was her turn. She walked home slowly, working out a strategy. The main thing was not to reveal that she knew about his plans. Let him think his wife was still the same naive fool who believes in gifts and tender care. Meanwhile, she would prepare her own plan, one far more intricate than Gonzalo could imagine. That evening at dinner, she spoke gratefully about the upcoming cruise, asked about the route and the onboard entertainment. Gonzalo answered with enthusiasm, sometimes even letting slip details only someone who had spoken personally to the organizers would know. Catalina nodded, smiled, and memorized every word. "You know," she said, setting down her fork, "I can't even remember the last time I was this excited for a trip. You're right, I really do need a change of scenery." Gonzalo smiled warmly at her, and for a second a flash of genuine tenderness passed through his eyes. "I want you to be happy, Catalina. You deserve only the best." "Of course I do," Catalina agreed softly, and her husband didn't catch the metallic note in her voice. "And I will certainly get what I deserve." That night, Catalina lay in bed beside her peacefully sleeping husband and stared at the ceiling. The plan was taking shape in her mind gradually, like a complex piece of architecture. She knew she had only one day to prepare everything, one day to turn from prey into hunter. Gonzalo thought he was sending his wife on her final journey, but he was wrong. This journey would indeed be the last. For their marriage, for his schemes, for his impunity. and for her it would be the beginning of a new life. One she would build upon the ruins of his betrayal. Hadn't he spoken of a new life that morning? Well, he would get one. Just not the one he'd planned. And when it was all over, he would realize he had underestimated the woman he considered weak and submissive. "If that's how it is, dear," Catalina whispered into the darkness, gazing at the profile of her sleeping husband, "then have it your way. But you'll be sorry. 3 times sorry." And for the first time in many years, she fell asleep with a smile on her lips. The next morning found Catalina already dressed and ready for action. She woke before the alarm, as if her inner clock understood the importance of every minute. Gonzalo was still sleeping, arms spread, breathing softly. And as she looked at him, she felt a strange mix of pity and disgust. This man, with whom she'd shared a bed for 20 years, had planned her murder with the same calm he usually devoted to planning a vacation. "Darling, I'm going to start getting ready for the trip," she said quietly when Gonzalo finally opened his eyes. "There's so much to do." Of course," he mumbled, stretching. "And I'm meeting Roberto today. We're putting the finishing touches on our project." "The finishing touches?" Catalina nodded with an understanding smile, though inside everything clenched with rage. How calmly he talked about arranging her death, as if discussing the purchase of a new car. The first stop on her route was a notary's office. The old building, with high ceilings and creaking floors, created an atmosphere of solemnity and irreversibility. Catalina sat in the waiting room, holding a folder of documents and weighing every word of the conversation to come. "Catalina?" The notary, an older woman with attentive eyes, invited her into the office. "How can I help?" "I need to make a will," Catalina said calmly, "and as quickly as possible." The notary raised an eyebrow. "Forgive the question, but is your life in danger?" "Are you under any pressure?" Catalina smiled bitterly. "On the contrary. For the first time in a long while, I'm doing what I believe is right. I have children, grown now, and I want them to receive everything that belongs to me, should anything happen." "And your husband?" "My husband will get exactly what he deserves," Catalina replied, steel in her voice, "which is nothing." Drafting the will took more than an hour. Catalina carefully listed every asset, every deposit, every valuable item. Much of what Gonzalo considered his was in fact registered to her or bought with her money back when she was still working. The country house had come from her parents, the shares in a large company she had purchased with her savings. The bank accounts had been opened before the marriage. "Quite a substantial estate," the notary remarked, scanning the list. "Is your husband aware?" "He'll find out in due course," Catalina said, signing the documents. "For now, it stays between us." Leaving the notary, she moved on to the next step of her plan. Marcella worked at one of the city's most prestigious law firms, and Catalina hoped their old friendship would help her get the advice she needed. They met in a small cafe near Marcella's office. Her former colleague had hardly changed over the years, except for looking more self-assured. A tailored business suit, a short haircut, the focused gaze of an experienced lawyer. "Catalina, it's been ages." Marcella hugged her, then drew back, searching her friend's face. "You look tense. Did something happen?" "You could say that." Catalina ordered a coffee and paused for a few seconds. wondering how to explain without going into details. Marcella, tell me as a lawyer, if a person is planning a crime against their spouse, but the spouse finds out in advance and takes measures to protect themselves, can that be considered self-defense? Marcella frowned. That's a very complex question. It depends on the specific circumstances. What kind of crime are we talking about? Hypothetically, Catalina kept her tone carefully steady. A murder staged as an accident. Catalina. Marcella grabbed her hand. What are you saying? Is this about your husband? Catalina nodded. I have reason to believe he's planning to get rid of me. And I want to know my rights. Marcella turned pale. You must go to the police immediately. With what? An overheard conversation? Gonzalo will say it was a prank or that I misunderstood. By the time there's real evidence, I'll be dead. Then refuse the trip. Don't go on that cruise. Catalina shook her head. Marcella, you don't understand. If I refuse, he'll find another way. I'd rather keep control of the situation. I need your help. They spent the next hour discussing legal intricacies. Marcella explained which documents to prepare to protect her assets, how to set up powers of attorney, and what certifications might be needed. Most importantly, she gave Catalina the contact of a private detective who specialized in family cases. Fernando used to be an investigator at the prosecutor's office. Now he's in private practice, Marcella said, writing down a number. He can gather evidence against your husband. But, Catalina, promise me you won't do anything risky. Catalina hugged her friend. I promise to be careful. Thank you. After meeting Marcella, she headed to a shopping mall. If she was going to play the role of a carefree tourist, she needed the wardrobe to match. In the fitting room, studying herself in a bright summer dress, Catalina was surprised to realize that over the years of marriage, she had almost forgotten what she looked like. House clothes, muted colors, cuts designed to hide her figure rather than flatter it. When was the last time she bought something pretty for herself? Not just because the old thing had worn out. That color looks wonderful on you, the saleswoman said, helping zip up the dress. You have a beautiful figure. Why hide it? Catalina turned in front of the mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed younger than her 45 years. There was a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there for a very long time. You're right, she said. I'll take this dress. And that one too, and a swimsuit. Shopping took longer than planned. It was as if Catalina were making up for years of self-denial, choosing things she truly liked. Bright colors, modern cuts, comfortable shoes for long walks on deck. If this was to be her last cruise as Gonzalo's wife, she would at least look the part. That evening, she met her children at a restaurant. Osvaldo and Belen, her adult children from her first marriage, had long lived their own lives and rarely visited their parents. Her son worked as a programmer at a large company. Her daughter did interior design. Both had inherited her keen mind and independent spirit. Mom, you look different, Belen noted as they sat at the table. Something's changed. Catalina smiled. Maybe I just missed you. How are things, son? All good, Osvaldo shrugged. Work, projects. And where are you off to on this cruise? Did Gonzalo decide to treat his wife? There was a hint of irony in her son's voice. The children had never been close to their stepfather, though they hadn't openly clashed either. There simply hadn't formed that bond that holds a family together. He thinks I need a rest, Catalina answered cautiously. Kids, I want to tell you something important. If anything happens to me... Mom? Belen grew alert. What are you talking about? Just listen. Catalina placed her hands on the table and looked seriously at her children. I've made a will. All my property goes to you. The documents are at the notary's. Copies are in a safe deposit box at the bank. I've written down the box number and all the necessary details and will leave them at home in my jewelry box. Mom, you're scaring us. Osvaldo frowned. What's going on? Are you ill? No, but life is unpredictable and I want to be sure you're protected. There's also a separate account at the bank your stepfather doesn't know about. Money from my former job, some savings. It's enough for you to live comfortably for a while if something happens. Belen took her mother's hand. Mom, you're scaring me. Is everything okay between you and Gonzalo? Catalina hesitated before answering. Let's say our relationship is going through a rough patch. But I'll manage. The main thing is for you to remember. Whatever happens, I love you very much. And if any problems arise, don't hesitate to contact Marcela. You remember her? Your former colleague? Of course we do. She'll help you with any legal issues. Now tell me about your lives. Osvaldo, how's your new project? Belen, have you finished the banker's apartment? They spent the rest of the evening in ordinary family conversation, though the children kept casting worried glances at their mother. Catalina tried to act naturally, but she felt that something in her manner betrayed the tension inside her. When they said goodbye, Belen hugged her tightly. Mom, promise me you'll be careful on this cruise. And if anything goes wrong, call immediately. We'll fly to you, wherever you are. I promise. Catalina kissed her daughter on the cheek. Take care of yourself. And look after your brother, too. The next morning, departure day. Catalina woke early and began the final preparations. Gonzalo bustled more than usual, checking documents, calling someone on the phone, issuing last-minute instructions. She caught snatches of his conversations. Yes? Everything's ready. No, she suspects nothing. Roberto, we'll meet after. At 9:30, the doorbell rang. Catalina opened it to find a courier with a small box. Catalina? A package for you. Gonzalo poked his head out of the kitchen. What's that? I don't know. Catalina took the box. Probably something for the cruise. I ordered it and forgot. Inside was a brand new top-of-the-line phone with a note. To stay in touch on your trip. Good luck. Marcela had made sure Catalina had reliable communication and a way to record conversations. What a considerate friend. Gonzalo muttered, irritation edging his voice. Why do you need a new phone? The old one might not work while roaming, Catalina replied, checking the device. Better to be safe. By 11 o'clock, the suitcases were packed and loaded into the car. Gonzalo was unusually silent all the way to the port, only occasionally glancing at his wife. Catalina sat beside him, looking out the window at the city sliding past. Somewhere back there lay her former life, her illusions, her naive belief that love could overcome everything. Catalina, Gonzalo said as they approached the port, I want you to know that whatever happens, I wish you only happiness. She turned to him and looked him straight in the eyes. In them flashed something that could be taken for genuine feeling. For a moment, she almost believed this was a nightmare, that she had misunderstood that conversation. Thank you. she said quietly. I also wish you get everything you deserve. Gonzalo smiled, not catching the hidden meaning of her words. See you in 2 weeks, darling. Yes, Catalina nodded, getting out of the car. See you. But only she knew when and under what circumstances that meeting would occur. As the porters took her luggage, her new jacket's pocket buzzed softly. A text from an unknown number. Everything is ready. Awaiting your signal, Catalina smiled and waved to Gonzalo, who stood by the car watching her. He thought he was sending his wife to her final destination. He was wrong. He was sending himself to meet just retribution. The cruise liner impressed even seasoned travelers. 10 decks gleaming with luxury rose above the water like a floating palace, where every detail had been carefully considered. Catalina stepped aboard with a sense of crossing a threshold into a new life, and that feeling proved prophetic. While her luggage was checked and sent to the cabin, she stood by the rail and looked down at the pier, where Gonzalo's figure could still be seen beside the car. Beautiful ship, isn't it? An elderly man in an expensive suit with a gray goatee and keen eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses stopped beside her. I'm Fernando, by the way. And you are, if I'm not mistaken, Catalina. Catalina turned to him, and her heart stopped for a second. The very private detective whose contact Marcella had given her. So he was really here. Her plan was beginning to come to life. Yes, that's me, she answered cautiously. And how do you know who I am? Marcella showed me a photo. We're, so to speak, colleagues in the trade. She asked me to keep an eye on you during the trip. Forgive my bluntness, but she's very worried. Catalina glanced around. Other passengers bustled nearby, but no one paid them any attention. Everyone was absorbed in the excitement of boarding the magnificent liner. Are you on this ship by chance? She asked softly. Fernando smiled. In our line of work, there are no coincidences. I've already begun the preliminary work. Your husband did meet with the captain 3 days ago. He also had conversations with several crew members. But, fortunately, not everyone is for sale. So you believed Marcella? I believed the documents she showed me. Plus, a former colleague of mine from the investigative committee has been eyeing your husband's activities for some time. So your reaching out was very timely. Catalina felt an invisible weight lift from her shoulders. She wasn't alone. There was a professional at her side who would help her not just survive, but achieve justice. What do I need to do? She asked. Act natural. Enjoy the cruise, meet people, take part in the activities. I'll be nearby, but it's better if we don't talk often in public. In an emergency, call the number saved in your new phone under Fernando. The ship sounded a long horn, announcing imminent departure. Passengers moved to the rails to wave to those seeing them off on the pier. Catalina also stepped to the railing and waved to Gonzalo. He waved back, smiling, playing the loving husband to the very last second. When the ship finally cast off and the shore began slowly to recede, she saw him get into the car and drive away, probably hurrying to Patricia to celebrate the start of his new life. What an exciting start to a journey. A woman in her 50s, full of enthusiasm, appeared beside Catalina. I'm Soledad, from the capital. And you're from where? Catalina, she introduced herself. It's my first cruise, too. My husband gifted it to me. Said it was time to take a break from family chores. Oh, how thoughtful. And he didn't come? Work won't let him. Business, you know. Soledad shook her head sympathetically. Always work, work. And life passes you by. At least he sent you to relax. That means he loves you. Catalina nodded, not trusting her voice. If only this kind woman knew what kind of love her husband had shown. The first day on board was spent getting to know the liner and its amenities. Catalina walked all the decks, learned the locations of the restaurants, the theater, the fitness center, the pools. Her cabin turned out to be comfortable, with a small balcony and a sea view. Everything was organized perfectly. And only she knew that this luxury had been meant to serve as the backdrop for her murder. The first dinner in the main restaurant turned into a proper introduction to her fellow travelers. At her table sat Soledad, a retired couple from a provincial city, a young woman who had saved all year for this cruise, and Fernando, who introduced himself as a former university lecturer. "It's my first time traveling alone," Catalina admitted when the conversation turned to travel companions. "I always used to go with my husband, but this time he decided to treat me to a solo vacation." "And he did very well," exclaimed an elderly lady from the coast. "Sometimes a woman needs to be alone with herself and think about life." "Oh, there's plenty to think about," Catalina agreed, and Fernando shot her a knowing look. After dinner, there was a meet-and-greet party on deck. Music played, people danced, laughed, and shared impressions. Catalina stood by the rail, a glass of champagne in hand, looking up at the stars over the sea. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to simply enjoy the moment, without thinking about housework, her husband's moods, or what to cook for tomorrow. "Beautiful night," Fernando said, coming up to her. "Yes, it's beautiful. And you know what? I feel free, for the first time in many years. That's a good feeling. It's worth holding on to." They fell silent, watching the wake the ship left across the moonlit path. "Fernando, tell me honestly, do I have a chance of coming out of this a winner?" "Catalina, you have what your husband lacks, a conscience and the support of honest people. That's worth a great deal." The next morning, the ship entered the first port of the route. Catalina joined a tour group and spent the day sightseeing in the ancient city. The guide spoke about history, culture, and traditions, while she thought how symbolic it was that her new life should begin in places where, thousands of years ago, people also fought for justice and the right to live with dignity. In the evening, back on the ship, she found a message in her cabin that there had been a call for her from shore. Time for the first act of her play. Catalina dialed the home number, and Gonzalo picked up. "Darling, how are you? How's the cruise?" "Wonderful," she replied, trying to keep her voice carefree. "The ship is luxurious, the weather's perfect, I'm meeting interesting people." "Thank you for this gift. I'm so glad. You deserve only the best. And you, how are things? Did you meet with Roberto?" There was a pause on the line. "Yes, of course. We discussed the project." "And? Is everything going according to plan?" "Yes, all great." "Catalina, you didn't happen to call the bank, did you? They asked me some odd questions on the phone today." Catalina smiled. So Marcella had already started moving, checking Gonzalo's financial transactions. "No, I didn't call." "What kind of questions?" "Oh, nothing trivial. Probably some routine audit. Catalina, be careful out there, okay? Anything can happen at sea." "Of course, dear. I'm very careful. And you know what? I feel like this cruise really will change my life." "I hope so too." Gonzalo's voice held a strange note. After the call, Catalina sat in her cabin thinking. Gonzalo was nervous, asking leading questions, hinting at the dangers of the sea. That meant the plan was already in motion and he was waiting for the right moment. But she had the advantage. She knew his intentions, while he thought he was dealing with a trusting wife. On the third day, what she'd been waiting for happened. One of the sailors, a young man with an uncertain look, approached her. "Catalina, my name is Diego. I'd like to speak with you in private." "About what?" she asked, though she already suspected. "About your husband. And about what he wants from me." They met late in the evening at one of the bars on the upper deck, when most passengers had already gone to their cabins. Diego looked anxious and kept glancing around. "Catalina, your husband offered me money, a lot of money, so that an accident would happen to you." "What exactly?" "You're supposed to fall overboard at night when no one's around. I was supposed to lure you onto the deck on some pretext but I can't do it. I have a mother myself, a sister. How could I live with that?" Catalina put a hand on his shoulder. "Diego, thank you for your honesty. What about the other crew members? Who else is involved?" "The first officer, Sergio. He was supposed to make sure the search would be brief and unsuccessful. And the ship's doctor, Rafael. He was to certify that you fell while intoxicated or from a heart attack." "I see. And the captain?" "The captain doesn't know anything. Sergio told him your husband just wanted to play a prank on you, to scare you. The captain is an honest man. He would never agree to such a thing." Catalina took out her phone. "Diego, are you willing to repeat all of this in front of witnesses? To record a statement?" The young sailor nodded. "Yes. I'm ashamed I agreed to even speak to him. But the money... I have debts. My mother is ill." "I understand. But now you're doing the right thing." They spent the next 2 hours taking Diego's detailed statement. Fernando joined them, and it turned out he had already gathered information on the other conspirators. Sergio had gambling debts. The doctor had recently divorced and needed money for alimony. Gonzalo knew how to find people's weak spots and use them. "What now?" Catalina asked. "Now we catch them red-handed," Fernando replied. "Diego will go to Sergio and say he's ready to carry out the job tonight. And we'll be ready." Catalina felt her heart start to race. "And if something goes wrong?" "Nothing will go wrong. We have a plan. We have evidence. And most importantly, we have honest people on this ship. Once the captain hears the truth, he'll be on our side." In the evening, Catalina dined in the restaurant as usual, chatted with her table mates, and laughed at Soledad's jokes. But inside, she was trembling with tension. That night was supposed to bring the event for which Gonzalo had orchestrated this entire spectacle. Only the ending would be nothing like what he had planned. At 10:30, Diego came up to her. "Catalina, would you come out to the deck? The sunset is beautiful, and there are dolphins swimming alongside the ship." "Of course, gladly." They went up to the upper deck, where it was indeed deserted and quiet. Only the sound of the sea and the distant music from the lower deck bars broke the night's silence. "Diego, you made the right choice," Catalina said softly. "Yes, I know." "Catalina, What will happen to my job when it all comes out? Honest people always find work, and the captain, I'm sure, will appreciate your courage. They stood by the rail, and Catalina saw several figures emerging from the shadows. Sergio and Dr. Raphael approached from one side, while from the other, Fernando and the ship's captain edged closer with security sailors. "Well, Diego, ready?" Sergio asked, stepping nearer. "Quick and quiet, just like we agreed." "Ready," Diego answered, though his voice shook. "Then go on. Push her, and that's it. The doctor will write that she was drunk and fell on her own." At that moment, powerful spotlights flashed on, flooding the deck with bright light. "Freeze, ship security." The captain and his men surrounded the conspirators. "You are under arrest on suspicion of preparing a murder." Sergio tried to run, but they subdued him quickly. Dr. Raphael turned as pale as a sheet. "I didn't do anything. It was him," he cried, pointing at the first officer. "All your conversations are recorded," Fernando said, showing a recorder. "We have witness statements and the complete picture of the crime." The captain approached Catalina. "Madam, accept my apologies. If I had known something like this was being prepared on my ship..." "It's not your fault, Captain. The important thing is that justice prevailed." "What will happen to them?" she asked, looking at the arrested men. "Upon arrival at the next port, they'll be handed over to the local authorities. After that, they'll decide. International maritime law is very strict in such cases." Catalina took out her phone. It was time to call home and tell her dear husband the news. "Gonzalo?" "It's me, Catalina." "Darling, how are you? Is everything okay? You know, something interesting happened." Several crew members were arrested on the ship for preparing the murder of one of the passengers. There was dead silence on the line. "Gonzalo, can you hear me?" Yes, I hear you. Who? Who were they going to kill?" "Me, dear. They were going to kill me." Silence again, then heavy breathing. "Catalina, I don't understand." "What are you talking about? That's impossible." "Oh, you understand very well, as well as the investigators now reviewing your financial operations. By the way, say hello to Patricia. She'll soon have to answer some unpleasant questions, too." "Catalina, wait. We need to talk." "No, dear, there's no time. Now you'll be the one waiting. Wait for my return. We're going to have a very interesting conversation." She hung up and looked out at the sea. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Gonzalo was beginning to realize that his perfect plan had failed. And she, contrary to his intentions, was alive, well, and ready for the final showdown. "This is only the beginning," she whispered to the sea breeze. "The most interesting part is still ahead." On the fourth day of the cruise, the sea, as if sensing the dramatic turn in Catalina's life, began to show its restless nature. Gray clouds hung low over the water, the waves grew higher, and the wind howled through the rigging with a troubling melody. The ship rocked from side to side, and even seasoned travelers hurried to take seasickness pills. Catalina stood on deck in a raincoat, watching the raging elements, thinking how symbolic the circumstances were. The storm at sea mirrored the tempest now unfolding at home in their cozy apartment, where Gonzalo was surely pacing in panic, trying to figure out how to set things right. "Aren't you afraid to stay on deck in this weather?" Fernando approached, gripping the rail against the sway. "After everything I've been through, it's hard to scare me," she replied, not taking her eyes off the stormy sea. Besides, a storm clears the air. Yes, and not just the air, he agreed. By the way, I have news. My colleagues on shore have already begun to act. Last night, some people from the tax authority came to your husband's home. Catalina turned to him with interest. And the routine audit turned into an in-depth investigation. It turns out the documents you passed along through Marcella contained very interesting information about tax evasion schemes. I hope everything was done legally? Fernando gave a wry smile. Absolutely. Your husband simply forgot he has a wife with an economics background who has spent 20 years observing his affairs and remembering the details. Indeed, all these years Gonzalo had considered her a housewife, incapable of grasping the subtleties of business. But she had quietly studied his schemes, memorized the partners' names, analyzed the financial flows. Once, that knowledge had seemed useless. Now, it had become her weapon. There were several missed calls from Gonzalo waiting for her in the cabin. Catalina dialed his number. Catalina, finally! Where the hell have you been? Her husband's voice held panic and barely concealed anger. Enjoying the cruise, dear. What happened? You sound agitated. People from the tax office came to see me. They're demanding documents, asking questions about accounts, about partners. They say there's information about violations. Is this your doing? Strange. Catalina sat on the edge of the bed, savoring the confusion in her husband's voice. And what did you tell them? What did I tell them? That everything is handled by the book, that there are no violations. But they're insisting on an audit. Catalina, I think someone ratted us out. Was it you? Who could that be? There wasn't a trace of irony in her voice, only genuine puzzlement. You don't have any enemies. And no, I had nothing to do with it. I don't know. Maybe competitors, or one of the partners decided to cover themselves. Roberto's been acting strange these last few days. Catalina smiled. So Roberto had already started to distance himself from the sinking ship. She'd been right in assuming his loyalty to Gonzalo had clear financial limits. And what does Patricia say? She's your secretary. She should have noticed something suspicious. There was a pause on the line. Patricia isn't working right now. She took a leave. How unexpected, right when you most need support. Catalina, stop. Gonzalo lost his temper. I know you understand everything. That arrest on the ship, the tax audit, everything lines up a little too neatly. Either someone's digging under me through you or you yourself. Darling, you're speaking in riddles. What's the connection between an attempt to kill a cruise passenger and a review of your tax returns? And I'm the victim here, by the way. Did you miss that? Quit playing dumb. You orchestrated all of it. Catalina fell silent, giving him the chance to fully incriminate himself. Gonzalo, tell me honestly, did you really want me to die on this cruise? It's not what you think. Are you accusing me of that? Then what? Explain to me what your conversation with Roberto about solving the problem of the wife meant. What were the talks with crew members about? The money for staging an accident? Gonzalo was breathing heavily. You were eavesdropping? Yes, I was. And you know what? It saved my life. Most importantly, it opened my eyes to who you really are. Catalina, listen to me. No, now you'll listen. For 20 years, I was your faithful wife. I gave up my career for your success. I endured your moods, your rudeness, your affairs. And how did you decide to thank me? With murder? It wouldn't be murder. It would be an accident. Catalina laughed. Do you hear yourself? You still think it was a good idea. I had no choice. A divorce would cost me half my fortune. So it was better to take my life than part with your money. You don't understand. I have plans, obligations. Patricia is expecting a child. Catalina felt the world around her stop. Patricia was pregnant. That changed everything. The infidelity hadn't lasted months, but years. He had planned to get rid of her long before the conversation she had overheard. Congratulations, she said in an icy tone. Now your child will have a murderer for a father. Catalina, don't what? Tell the truth? You're right. No need. The investigators will tell it now. By the way, how is Patricia? Does she know about your methods for solving family problems? She doesn't know anything. And don't you dare drag her into this. Me? You dragged her in when you started an affair with her while planning to kill your wife. What do you think she'll feel when she finds out? After that conversation, Catalina sat in the cabin for a long time, gazing through the porthole at the raging sea. Patricia was pregnant. This news changed everything. Now there was an innocent child in the picture, one who wasn't to blame for having a scoundrel for a father. That evening, despite the rolling, quite a few passengers gathered in the restaurant. People tried to act normal, though many looked pale from seasickness. Catalina joined her table, where Soledad was telling how she and her husband had been caught in a storm 30 years ago on their honeymoon. And you, Catalina, how are you handling the pitching? She asked. Surprisingly well. Maybe because I'm used to storms in life. Oh, everyone has their own tempests, a wise elderly lady from the provinces observed. The main thing is to learn not to sink in them. Exactly, Catalina agreed. Sometimes a storm is even useful. It washes away everything excessive, unnecessary, fake. After dinner, she went up to the deck. The wind had weakened, but the sea was still restless. Fernando was waiting for her by the rail. Any news? She asked. Yes, not very pleasant ones for your husband. The bank has frozen several of his accounts on suspicion of money laundering. Roberto has given a statement to the investigators and is fully cooperating with the authorities. So he chose a side? He chose himself. He provided documents that compromise your husband in exchange for leniency. Catalina nodded. And what about Patricia? And how do you know about her? Gonzalo slipped today. Turns out she's pregnant. Fernando frowned. That complicates things. On the contrary, it simplifies them. Tell me, does she know about Gonzalo's plans regarding me? According to our information, no. She thought you'd simply divorce after the cruise. Then she has a chance to make the right choice. What do you mean? Catalina turned toward the sea. I have a plan. But to carry it out, I'll need to get in touch with Patricia. The next day, the storm subsided and the sea calmed again. Catalina spent the morning on deck, enjoying the sun and fresh air, and after lunch locked herself in her cabin and dialed Patricia's number. Hello. The voice was young, a little frightened. Patricia, this is Catalina, Gonzalo's wife. Silence on the line. I know you're pregnant. Catalina continued. And I know Gonzalo promised to marry you after divorcing me. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just listen. Gonzalo didn't plan to divorce me, Patricia. He planned to kill me. What? That's impossible. Very possible, and I have proof. Members of the cruise ship's crew have already been arrested for preparing my murder at his request. Patricia sobbed. That can't be true. Patricia, you're carrying the child of a potential murderer. Think about your future, about your baby's future. Gonzalo was ready to kill the mother of his children for money. What would stop him from doing the same to you if you became inconvenient? But he said he loved me. He told me the same thing 20 years ago. Love and murder don't go well together, don't you think? Catalina heard crying on the line. What should I do? Patricia whispered. Think of the child. Protect him from a father capable of killing. Do you have family? My mother, in another city. Go to her. Right now. And don't speak to Gonzalo again until everything is sorted out. What if he tries to find me? Let him try. He has bigger problems right now. The tax service, the investigative committee, frozen accounts. He won't have time for you. Catalina, forgive me. I didn't know. You were young and foolish. But you have a chance to set things right. For your child's sake. After the call, Catalina felt a strange sense of relief. She hadn't taken revenge on Patricia, even though Patricia had destroyed her marriage. Because she realized the marriage had been broken long before the young secretary appeared. Gonzalo had used her just as he used everyone else. That evening, Gonzalo called. His voice sounded completely shattered. Catalina. Patricia's gone. She packed her things and left without saying where. And how do you feel? I'm alone. Roberta won't take my calls. The accounts are frozen. The tax office is demanding documents I don't have. Catalina, help me. I know what I've done, but I'll change. We can start over. Catalina laughed. Start over? After you tried to kill me? It was stupid, a momentary lapse of reason. Momentary? Gonzalo, you planned it for weeks. You met with people, paid money, worked out the details. It won't happen again. It can't happen again. Because now I know who you are. And very soon, everyone will know. What do you want? Justice. And I want you to understand that the woman you thought was weak and foolish turned out to be much stronger and smarter than you. Catalina. See you, Gonzalo. I'll be home soon, and we're going to have a very interesting conversation. She hung up and stepped out onto the deck. The sea had calmed. The stars shone brightly in the clear sky. The storm had passed, leaving clean air and a sense of renewal. On deck, Fernando was waiting for her with a folder of documents in his hands. Catalina, I have the final report for you, he said, handing her the folder. While you were speaking with your husband, I received the latest information from my colleagues. Catalina opened the folder and began to study the documents. Bank statements, witness testimonies, photos of Gonzalo's meetings with shady characters, recordings of phone calls. An impressive picture was taking shape. Roberto turned out to be very cooperative. Fernando continued. He told us not only about the attempted murder, but also about all the financial schemes he ran with your husband. Tax evasion, Sham deals, cashing out through shell companies. And what about the company? The employees aren't to blame for their boss being a scoundrel. The honest employees won't suffer. But those who were in on the schemes. Fernando shook his head. They'll have to answer for their actions. Catalina leafed through the documents, her astonishment growing with each page. It turned out Gonzalo had deceived not only her, but the tax authorities, the partners, and even his own employees. He had built an entire empire of lies, with himself at the center, like a spider in its web. You know what amazes me most, she said, closing the folder, is not that he wanted to kill me, that I can explain by greed and cowardice. It's how methodically he deceived everyone, for years, for decades. How he looked me in the eye and spoke of love, knowing he was planning my murder. Unfortunately, such people exist, Fernando replied. To them, other people aren't people, but tools to achieve their goals. When the tool becomes inconvenient, they get rid of it. But I turned out not to be as convenient as he thought. You turned out to be much stronger than he imagined. And smarter. They fell silent, gazing up at the starry sky. Somewhere far beyond the horizon lay the world where Gonzalo was pacing in panic, losing everything he thought was rightfully his. Catalina, what will you do when you return? Fernando asked. Live, she answered simply. A real life, not the shadow of someone else's ambitions. Maybe I'll go back to translation work. My languages haven't gone anywhere, only my experience has grown. And your husband? Do you plan to see him? Catalina smirked. The meeting is inevitable. We have to file for divorce, divide the property. But now it will happen on my terms, not his. Are you sure he won't try something? A cornered man can be dangerous. Gonzalo isn't dangerous. He's a coward. As soon as he realized the plan had failed, he immediately started looking for someone to blame and begging for mercy. People like that are frightening only when they're sure they'll go unpunished. The next day, the ship really did turn back. The passengers were in high spirits after the storm. Many said it had added a special thrill to the cruise and would be remembered for life. Catalina smiled as she listened to these conversations. If only they knew what a real storm had raged in her life, and how it had changed her entire existence. Soledad sat down beside her at breakfast. Catalina, you've changed somehow over these days, she noted. You've become more confident, perhaps? Must be the sea air, Catalina replied. Or maybe I've simply understood something important about myself. And what's that? That I'm stronger than I thought, and that you don't have to put up with what doesn't suit you just because that's how it's done. Wise words. I also endured an unsuitable life for a long time until I decided to change it. And do you regret it? Not for a minute. It was only scary at first. Then I realized the scariest thing isn't change. It's the lack of it. In the evening, Catalina called her children. Osvaldo picked up right away. Mom, how are you? We're worried. Everything's fine, son. Even better than I expected. How are things at home? Strange question. What about home? Gonzalo called several times looking for you. He seemed nervous. Yes, he's going through a rough patch. Business problems. Mom, are things okay between you two? After that conversation at the restaurant, I can't shake the feeling that something's going on. Catalina paused. The children had a right to know the truth. but not over the phone, not from thousands of kilometers away. Osvaldo, when I get back, we'll talk about everything. For now, I'll only say this. Your mother has learned to defend herself. Mom, you're scaring us. On the contrary, I'm reassuring you. I'll be home very soon, and we'll have a long talk. Call your sister and tell her everything's great with Mom. Okay, just be careful. I will. After talking to her son, Catalina reviewed the documents Fernando had given her once more. Tomorrow they would be home, and a new chapter of her life would begin, a chapter in which she would write the script herself, instead of settling for a bit part in someone else's play. She walked over to the cabin mirror and studied her reflection. The woman looking back at her seemed younger, more confident, calmer. There was a fire in her eyes that hadn't burned in years. Gonzalo had wanted to extinguish that fire forever, but achieved the opposite. He had stoked it brighter than before. Tomorrow the ship would turn back, and the journey home would begin. But the woman returning home was not the obedient wife who had boarded a week earlier. She was returning ready for the final showdown for her freedom and dignity. Gonzalo, you chose this path yourself, she whispered to the stars. Now follow it to the end. The homecoming began with a symbolic scene. The port greeted Catalina on a gray August morning, when the summer heat was already beginning to fade, giving way to autumn freshness. She stood on the ship's deck, watching the familiar outline of the city, and felt she was returning not to her former life, but to an entirely new reality she would have to build from scratch. Fernando helped with her luggage and offered a few parting tips. Catalina, remember, you now have all the documents and witness statements, but your main weapon is calm and confidence in your own rightness. Don't let him drag you into emotional games. Thank you for everything, she said, shaking his hand. I couldn't have managed without your help. You would have managed. It just would have taken longer. The taxi got her home faster than she expected. Catalina stood before her apartment door, keys in hand, unable to make herself turn the lock. Behind that door awaited a meeting with the man who, just 2 weeks ago, had planned her murder, the man who had deceived her for 20 years, exploiting her love and trust. At last, she steeled herself and went in. The apartment greeted her with silence and stale air. Gonzalo peeked out of the study, and when he saw his wife, his face twisted with a mix of relief and fear. Catalina, you're back. He tried to approach her, but stopped when he saw her expression. Yes, I'm back. Alive and well, despite your plans. Gonzalo looked terrible, unshaven, gaunt, in a wrinkled shirt, with shadows of sleepless nights under his eyes. 2 weeks of nightmare had turned the once successful businessman into a cornered animal. Catalina, we need to talk. I understand you're angry, but hear me out. Angry? Catalina set down her suitcase and turned to her husband. Gonzalo, you tried to kill me. Angry is far too weak a word for what I feel. It was madness. A temporary lapse of reason. I would never have harmed you. Catalina took out her phone and played the recording of her conversation with Diego, where the plan for her murder was laid out in detail. The sailor's voice sounded in the apartment like a verdict. A temporary lapse that lasted several weeks and included finding perpetrators, transferring money, and carefully working out the scenario. That's not a lapse. It's premeditated murder. Gonzalo turned pale. Where did you get that recording? From honest people who refuse to take part in your plans. Turns out there are more of them than you thought. She went to the kitchen, poured herself some water, and sat at the table. Gonzalo followed, nervously twisting his shirt in his hands. Catalina, I'm ready to make things right. We can divorce amicably. I'll give you whatever you want. Whatever I want? Catalina smirked. Remember the fairy tale about the goldfish? There were 3 wishes. Well, I have 3 wishes too, and they're already coming true. What are you talking about? The first wish concerns justice. You wanted me to disappear so your life would be easier. But you're the one who disappeared, Gonzalo. Your business, your money, your reputation. The tax service and the investigative committee took care of that. Gonzalo clenched his fists. You set this up. You put Roberto up to it. I merely gave him a choice between you and his own freedom. He chose freedom. I can't blame him for that. What do you want from me? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. My first wish has already been granted. You got what you deserved. Catalina stood and walked to the window. Children were playing in the courtyard. Dogs barked somewhere. Life flowed on, indifferent to people's private dramas. And the second wish? Gonzalo asked quietly. The second wish concerns Patricia and your child. What do you know about the child? Enough. I know it's a boy. I know she got scared and went to her mother's. And I know she no longer wants anything to do with you. You spoke to her? I did. I explained exactly what kind of person is the father of her future child. Patricia turned out to be smarter than I thought. She made the right choice. Gonzalo collapsed into a chair and covered his face with his hands. You've taken everything from me. The business, the money, the woman I love. I haven't taken anything from you, Gonzalo. You lost it all yourself when you decided that murdering your own wife was an acceptable way to solve problems. Catalina returned to the table and sat across from him. For the first time in many years, she felt his equal. Stronger even. But I'm not a monster, Gonzalo. Patricia will receive financial support for the child. From me. From you. Gonzalo raised his head. Why? Because the child isn't to blame for having a scoundrel for a father. And because I don't want him to grow up in poverty just because of your crimes. You'll help the woman who ruined our marriage? Catalina laughed. Gonzalo, you ruined our marriage when you decided to kill me. Patricia has nothing to do with it. She was just a tool in your hands, like I was all these years. Gonzalo was silent, digesting this. And the third wish? He asked at last. The third wish is the most important. It concerns me. Catalina stood and paced the kitchen. Here, within these walls, she had spent the best years of her life thinking she was building a family, when in fact she had been nothing more than a convenient attachment to someone else's ambitions. Tomorrow morning, I start work at an international trading company. As a translator, just like 20 years ago. The salary's good, the prospects excellent, business trips all over the world. But how? You haven't worked for so many years? And you thought I'd turned into a domesticated hen in all that time? I've been reading, studying, polishing my languages. I just did it quietly, without drawing attention. Gonzalo looked at her as if she were a stranger. And the apartment? Half of it is mine by law. But I don't want it. Too many bad memories. I'm buying a new place for myself, smaller but cozier. And me? Catalina shrugged. You can live wherever you want. That's no longer my problem. Catalina, can't you forgive me? We lived together 20 years. Yes, we did. But it turns out those were 20 years of deception. You never loved me, Gonzalo. You loved a convenient wife who didn't interfere with your affairs or ask awkward questions. And when she stopped being convenient, you decided to get rid of her. That's not true. Then tell me, when did you decide to kill me? When did you first think of it? Gonzalo said nothing. I'll tell you when. 2 years ago, when I accidentally saw the documents for your sham deal and asked an inconvenient question. Remember? You were furious. You said women shouldn't stick their noses into men's business. Catalina. And then Patricia appeared. And you realized you could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Get rid of the wife who knew too much and marry the young mistress. Catalina walked up to her husband and laid a hand on his shoulder. Strangely, she no longer felt hatred, only weariness and pity. Gonzalo, you're not a horror movie villain. You're just a weak man who doesn't know how to take responsibility for his actions. But weakness doesn't excuse attempted murder. What will happen to me now? I don't know. That depends on the investigation, the court, your lawyer. But most of all, on you. Try, at long last, to be honest. Catalina picked up a bag with the bare essentials. The rest could be collected later through her attorney. Catalina, wait. Gonzalo grabbed her hand. What if I change? If I prove I can be different? She gently freed her hand. Gonzalo, that would take another 20 years. And I no longer have time for your reform. I have my own life, and I intend to live it honestly and with dignity. He walked her to the door, and Catalina felt she was closing not only the door of the apartment, but an entire era of her existence. A taxi was waiting outside. The driver helped load the bag and asked for the address. Downtown, to the new buildings on the embankment, Catalina replied. As the car drove through the familiar streets, she looked out the window and thought about the future. Tomorrow. A new job, new people, new tasks. In a week, a new apartment with a river view. In a month, the first business trip abroad. Life was finally beginning anew. Her phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. Thank you. I'll name my son Alejandro in honor of a protector. P.A. Catalina smiled. Patricia was thanking her for saving her. The second wish had also come true. The woman who could have become Gonzalo's next victim was safe. The car stopped by a tall building on the riverbank. Catalina paid the driver and looked up at the windows of the apartment that would soon be her home. A real home where she would live for herself and not for someone else's ambitions. The evening sun turned the water golden. Somewhere in the distance, music played. Young couples strolled along the embankment. Life went on, and now Catalina was a full participant in it, not an observer on the sidelines. 3 wishes had come true. Justice had prevailed, the innocent were protected, and she herself had found freedom. Gonzalo had told the truth about only one thing. This cruise really had changed her life. Just not the way he had planned. The cruise was over, but the journey into a new life had only just begun.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.